Imagine achieving your dreams, achieving your goals, the things that you want in life, only to be plagued by this nagging feeling that you don't actually deserve what you have. Does this sound familiar at all? Or maybe you know you have skills, you've got great experiences, but you don't believe that those skills or the gifts that you have will actually be of value to anybody else. I'm talking about the dreaded imposter syndrome. And look, I've been coaching celebrities, actors, influencers, singers, performers, speakers, very successful entrepreneurs for many, many years, since 2008. And I can say that even they experience imposter syndrome. Even myself, I've been singing on stage and in recording studios since I was 8 years old. I've been in business running a coaching company since 2008, and I still get imposter syndrome sometimes on a daily basis. This is something that we all experience. But what if I told you that imposter syndrome isn't necessarily 100% bad? What if there's a way to reframe imposter syndrome so that it actually helps us to achieve the goals that we want in life? In this episode, we're going to dive into this topic of imposter syndrome. In fact, you and I are going to look at imposter syndrome square in the ugly eye. We're going to confront it. I'm going to share some of the things that I've discovered and learned about imposter syndrome. And I'm also going to share some strategies that have helped both myself and my clients, and hopefully they can help you in terms of reframing and overcoming imposter syndrome. And finally, I'm going to share why imposter syndrome might not actually be all that bad after all. Our ability to influence others is directly impacted by the way we use our voices. After over 16 years coaching some of the world's biggest voices in business, music, TV, and film, I can say with certainty that if you have a voice, then you can learn to use it with confidence and skill. My name is Krystal Diaz. Welcome to the Vocal Branding Podcast. In this episode, we're talking about imposter syndrome. First of all, what is it? The dictionary definition is that it's the persistent inability to believe that one's success is deserved or has been legitimately achieved as a result of one's own efforts or skills. So in other words, you are somebody that has achieved success. Maybe you have achieved all the goals that you set up for yourself in life, but there's a part of you, a big part of you maybe, that doesn't really believe you truly earned it or that you even deserve it. Now, this is a very internal thing. It's not because anybody else around you has told you this. This is just something that you believe within yourself. You feel like an imposter. You feel like you're pretending. So that's one way that imposter syndrome can show up. And also, I've seen it showing up for those who believe that they don't actually have any real gifts or experiences or knowledge or skills that will be of value to other people that anybody else would appreciate. And so let me give you an example of that because I feel like this can be a little bit more subtle. So I have a friend who is fantastic at interior decorating. Now, she wasn't trained as an interior decorator, but she's really, really gifted at it. So she's done up her own apartments, her own homes, and she will do it for her friends. And she has this remarkable skill of creating a very classy, a timeless space, a home space, but yet at the same time making it feel totally approachable, very comfortable, and very inviting. And I've shared with her before that this is a really fantastic skill and she really has an eye for this, but she will always go back to saying, well, I'm not trained in it. I don't think anybody would value this, but yes, she'll go and do it for all of her friends for free, right? So I do see this as imposter syndrome as well, as when you don't really believe in the gifts that you have and you don't really think that anybody is going to value it. It's almost like your inner voice or your inner critic is saying things like, who are you to think that you're talented in this area? Or who are you to think that you deserve this success? Who are you to think that you could help others or that your skills could be of value to other people? And I always tell my students and the people that I work with that we've got two voices. We have that inner voice and we have the outer voice. And the inner voice will always dictate how the outer voice comes across. So the outer voice is the sound that you're hearing right now, the way that your voice sounds when you talk to other people, the way that they hear it, and the way that they interpret what it is that you are saying and how you are saying it. So that's your outer voice. And then the inner voice is that internal monologue, that internal dialogue that you have with yourself, your internal critic. And of course, if that inner voice is speaking from a non-empowering standpoint, then that is going to impact how your outer voice comes across to other people. That's going to impact how you speak, the words that you use, how you use your voice, how your voice sounds, etc. And this is true even if you have all of the external evidence pointing otherwise. So for example, I mentioned earlier that I've worked with very, very well-known performers and actors on their vocal skills, and they still battle with imposter syndrome, even when the evidence is clear that they deserve what they've achieved, that they are very talented, that they've put in the work, but there's still sometimes a part of them that doesn't really feel like they deserve it, that they just lucked out, And so that really can impact the way they show up in the future for future opportunities as well. For me personally, there are times in my life where I feel like I'm battling with imposter syndrome on a day-to-day basis. But there was one significant time in my life when this really played out and had a huge impact on my life. This was many years ago. I want to say it was 2015 or yes, it was 2015 because that was when my second daughter was born. And I had been running a company since 2008 by that time. So what, 7 years. I was really busy. I was working nonstop and never really gave myself a break. And I was really struggling. And I decided to enroll in some programs to teach me how to get out of this constantly working cycle. So I actually enrolled in some business courses. And I remember being in those circles with other business owners and other entrepreneurs. And I was just thinking, I do not belong here. I am such an imposter. Who am I to even think that I can run and scale a business? And even though I had been running a business and training staff and managing a team for 7 years, and we were successful, I never saw myself as a business owner. I never saw myself or identified as an entrepreneur. And there are significant consequences of that because in my head, I'm not an entrepreneur. I don't know how to scale a business. I don't really know what I'm doing when it comes to running my business. So my mindset was, well, as long as I am just good at what I do, which is teaching, then that's good enough. And the ultimate consequence of not thinking of myself as an entrepreneur who's capable of running and scaling a business is that I built a job for myself. The goal of running your own business is not so that you build a job that is completely reliant on you. The goal, ideally, is to create a business that supports the lifestyle that you want to have, that you can make the impact, but at the same time, you can create your own freedom so that you have choices in how you want to live your life. And I really do think that because I didn't think of myself as capable of doing that, then I just ended up building this job that was completely reliant on me. And so when I was in these entrepreneurial circles, I felt very out of place. But I made a decision. There was a process behind all of this, of course. But the more I took on that identity of I am an entrepreneur, I do have these skills are available to me, then I started thinking differently. I started looking at my business differently. I started looking at it as a business, not as a job that I wanted to create for myself. So that led me to understand the value of systems, creating processes behind our workflow, being more intentional about the kind of team that I wanted to create and what I did not want to create, and also building scalable assets. So for example, a big one is adding a singing membership to our business and creating it so that it is now a fully scalable asset. If I hadn't stepped into that identity of entrepreneur, of business owner, I don't think that I would have even had the capacity or the awareness to think creatively outside of the situation that I had already created for myself and my family. But where does imposter syndrome even come from? Why is it so, first of all, relatable to so many of us? And where does it really stem from? Well, as I was pondering this question, I remembered Marissa Peer. Marissa Peer is a renowned speaker. She's also a rapid transformational therapy trainer, and she's a best-selling author. So Marissa Peer says that there are only three things that are wrong with us based on her many, many, many years of experience coaching and researching this topic. We may have all these different kinds of problems, but we can trace them back to three misbeliefs or misguided beliefs. And I think that each of these beliefs are definitely related to imposter syndrome. We can definitely trace imposter syndrome back to these three misguided beliefs. Number one is the belief that we are not enough. I am not enough. I'm not talented enough, smart enough, rich enough, good enough, intelligent enough, whatever enough, right? So we are always lacking. So how does this belief turn into imposter syndrome? Well, if we believe that we are not enough, that's a deep-rooted belief, then we may achieve goals in life, but we're never going to look at it as enough either. We're never going to look at it as something that we can really truly be proud of because we don't really feel like we've deserved it. I'm not good enough. There's no way that I really deserve even having this. So I'm an imposter. Even if the evidence points otherwise, even if I have achieved success, oh, sure, I've achieved these goals, but those goals don't mean anything to me because I know deep down I am not worthy of them. I am not enough. Number two is the belief that what I desire is not available to me. So I may desire love, happiness, success, wealth, good health, but the subconscious pattern or the subconscious belief pattern is none of that stuff is available to me. Maybe I just wasn't born talented, or I am genetically predisposed to having bad health. And so if we do have those belief patterns in us, then even if we are quite ambitious, even if we are putting in the work to want to achieve these things, if there's a subconscious belief that's saying, you can't really get it, you're not really gonna succeed, so you're an imposter for even trying. Why are you even bothering to try to achieve these things that are just not available to you? So you can see how then imposter syndrome can start to creep in, even for people who are working towards achieving their goals and they are putting in all that work, they're putting in the hours and they're working really hard, but they're still not happy because ultimately the belief pattern in them is, why are you even bothering? You don't deserve this. You are not going to achieve it. You are such an imposter. You can see how that can completely debilitate a person and be totally exhausting. Number three is the belief that I am different and I cannot connect. So for example, you may find yourself in social circles or professional circles where you actually don't feel like you belong. And so every time you're there, you feel like, I'm just not like everybody else. What's wrong with me? I shouldn't be here. And so that can definitely create imposter syndrome, because then the environments that you find yourself in will make you feel like you are posing, like you are pretending to be somebody that you're not, because the underlying belief is that I'm just not like everybody else. I can't connect. Nobody will be able to relate to me, and I just can't relate to anybody else. And this actually relates directly to the experience that I had, which I shared earlier, where I really did not feel like I belonged in any conversation around entrepreneurship. So again, those three beliefs that Marissa Peer says that pretty much all of our problems can be traced back to is the belief that I am not enough, the belief that what I desire is not available to me, and the belief that I'm different and I can't connect. I thought that this was a good framework to structure this discussion about imposter syndrome. And I think we can still use this same framework to think about the potential consequences when we live our lives ruled by imposter syndrome, or we see life through the lens of imposter syndrome. Well, one of the consequences is that we're always going to be chasing something, but never really feeling like we've fully attained it. So if the underlying belief that we have is I'm not enough and I am an imposter for even trying to be successful, then we're always going to be setting ourselves up for achieving these goals and not actually acknowledging or giving ourselves that enjoyment of having achieved it, because deep down we're always going to feel like, well, that's not enough, that's not enough. And so we're always going to be in this cycle of work harder, try harder, do better. And that can really trigger, I mean, all kinds of emotional anxiety, health issues, relationship issues, even. And also, it's going to affect how you ultimately show up and the way in which you go about achieving these goals. For example, if you always have this feeling that you're not really enough, then I believe that that's going to come out in the way that you express yourself. It's going to come out in the way that you use your voice. It's going to come out in the way that you sound, the way that you act. And so that already is you not stepping into your most empowered self. You're actually in a more limited version of yourself. Now, that second belief, if you remember, is what I desire is not available to me. So if I have that as an underlying belief and I'm thinking to myself, those goals that I want to achieve, those things that I want in life, they're not really available to me, then I'm going to feel like an imposter for even trying. So what's the consequence of that? I'm not going to try, right? Or I'm not going to try very hard, because why would you try hard to achieve something when you don't really think you can ever have that? So then again, you're going to limit yourself. Either that, or you're not even going to go look for potential opportunities. And opportunities are there. An opportunity might come up to you, but if you yourself are thinking, that's not for me, I'm an imposter for even wanting to, have that opportunity, you're probably going to edit that out of your awareness, right? You're not going to go looking for it, and you're not going to see it if it does get presented to you. Now, what about the third belief? The third belief was I am different and I can't connect. So if you have that as an underlying belief, it can show up as imposter syndrome when you are in certain social or professional circles or environments. And so the consequence of that is you end up isolating yourself, right? Because why would you put yourself into a situation where you don't feel like you belong or you don't feel like you will be accepted? So instead of reaching out into these communities, you end up feeling like you shouldn't be there. So then you will probably not seek them out as avidly, right? And also the other consequence of that is that you don't end up building a network or a support team. You don't even reach out for support because you feel like, why would I even bother reaching out for support when I don't even belong in those circles to begin with? And so then you end up missing out on opportunities to build a supportive network that can really help you flourish, relationships, friendships, business connections, even audiences for your work if you are a performer or you are an artist, for example. So there are many consequences of living our lives under imposter syndrome. And these are just a few that I've outlined. There are, I'm sure, many, many, many more potential consequences. So knowing that, what can we do about it? What are some of the strategies that can help us overcome imposter syndrome? Well, firstly, I think it's important to acknowledge that you are not alone. We are not alone in this feeling of being imposters. And I think that it's something we can overlook very easily. Because if you think about it, the whole idea of imposter syndrome is a very internal experience. And so outwardly, people can seem very, very successful, but internally, they could feel anything but successful. So when we look from the outside, it's easy to assume that successful people don't have it. And that's not true. We all experience it. And I think the second thing to acknowledge here is that this is an ongoing process. It's not a switch that we can suddenly recognize, oh, that's imposter syndrome, I'm going to switch it off now. That's not really how it works, right? We're human beings. And so it is a process, and it is an ongoing conversation that I believe we should allow ourselves to have with those close to us, or even with those that we work with. And I think the more we acknowledge with those we are close with or the communities that we are in that imposter syndrome is normal, I think the easier it will be for us to become more aware of the signs of imposter syndrome when, when those thoughts creep up, and also to seek for help and to see different perspectives when we find ourselves getting lost in the mire of imposter syndrome. But let's talk about some practical strategies. And so these are all things that I have done personally and that I know my clients have done as well that have been useful. So I'm sharing that with you here. There are many, many more strategies that can help you with imposter syndrome. So I'm just going to share 3 that hopefully you will find helpful. Number 1 is to embrace the power of the alter ego, right? So this is a fun one. If we think about Beyonce, and she's talked about this, her alter ego is Sasha Fierce. In fact, I remember Beyonce has talked about how she's actually she sees herself as an introvert, right? Like who knew, right? That she saw herself as that. And it was only until she embraced this alter ego, she created this alter ego called Sasha Fierce, that enabled her to step into this other version of herself and perform with confidence. And I think that this is something that has definitely helped me in my performances, and it has definitely helped many of my students who are artists, performers, actors even. So how do we incorporate this into our daily lives? Well, I'm not saying that we should show up at work tomorrow being our version of Sasha Fierce, although if you want to, go for it. But I think we can allow ourselves to play with the idea that there are different versions of ourselves, right? Yes, we may identify more with being an introvert, for example, but there is an extroverted version of yourself, right? There are situations where you are extrovert, and there are situations where you might be shy. There are situations where you might be very bold. So even just allowing ourselves to acknowledge that we have this capacity to step into different versions of ourselves and then practice doing that even on a subtle level, that can already open up different ways of thinking. And one of the ways that I like to do this when it comes to just day-to-day life stuff is asking myself this question: what would it look like if, right? So what would it look like if I were a confident business owner who knows how to make the right decision? What would that look like in me? And just stepping into that role, even entertaining the idea of what would it look like if I was a very confident speaker? What would it look like if I was a confident conversationalist, for example? What would it look like if I was the CEO of this organization that I work for? How would I walk? How would I behave? Right? Because if you can imagine it, then I believe that it's in you. And I think the more we practice that, even if it's just a mental exercise or a mental game that we're playing, then it normalizes this idea that, you know what, my identity is how I shape it to be. I have the choice to show up as my empowered self, or I have the choice to show up as my limited self. Another strategy that can help overcome imposter syndrome is to mentor other people. So offer yourself as a mentor for somebody else. And I found this to be so insightful and so valuable in a surprising way when I started training other people how to coach singing specifically. So this was when I was running a singing studio and we had multiple classrooms. We were at capacity. We knew we had to start recruiting teachers to work for us to take these classes. But we also wanted to make sure that the level of instruction was similar across the board so that students would have a bit of a uniformity if they wanted to jump from one coach to another, for example. And so we had quite a rigorous voice coaching teaching program. So I was mentoring these other coaches on how to teach and how to work with students. And I went into it with more of a practical mindset, thinking I want the students to have similar experiences no matter who they work with, and to have the same quality of experience rather. But what I didn't realize is how much that experience taught me about myself. And this is not something that's new, right? People say to really understand something, teach it. And I think that it can be true in so many ways, because not only does it force you to get out of your own mind, because it's not really about you anymore, it's about helping somebody else. You're mentoring somebody else and helping to build that person up. Also through that process, you gain a lot of new insights, new perspectives on situations, because the people that you mentor will have fresh set of eyes, right? They will have their own take on situations. They will have their own perspectives. And so that encourages you to open up your mindset a lot as well. You can learn a lot from the people that you are mentoring. In fact, I think that's one of the biggest reasons why everybody should mentor, because you learn so much from the people that you are mentoring. And also by that process, when you mentor other people, you actually realize you have a lot to give. You have a lot of skills, you have a lot of experiences and knowledge that are valuable to somebody else, that can really help somebody. And I don't think that I had realized that until I remember some of the people that I was training, they would ask me questions and I would have an answer for them. And I remember feeling surprised, thinking, I didn't know I knew this. Because if we don't allow ourselves to be in those situations where we can really let ourselves shine, and if we feel like we're an imposter, we're not going to be putting ourselves in situations where we're going to be potentially exposed, right? But if we actively seek out these situations where we are mentoring other people, it's not about us anymore. It's about helping somebody else and helping to build up somebody else. We actually realize we have a lot to give. And that's very, very, very valuable in terms of shifting your mindset when it comes to imposter syndrome. One more strategy that has really helped me when it comes to overcoming imposter syndrome is celebrating micro wins. It's so easy for us to fall into diminishing ourselves. And I see this happening all the time with the people that I work with, my students, my coaching clients, who make progress, but they discount it, right? So for example, we come to a session and I'm working with them and we recognize that, hey, you've really made progress here. But it's so easy for somebody to say, yeah, but, yeah, sure, but, right? And to discount those micro wins that are actually very significant. We often think that wins have to be huge and sweeping, but actually it's those micro wins accumulated over time that ultimately end up in those big sweeping wins. So we want to get into this mindset of celebrating micro wins, and we want to do it publicly. And so the best way that I've found that has really, really helped me is joining a mastermind. So I've been in a mastermind for, I think, 3 years now. I want to say, yeah, actually it has been 3 years. And it's a long-term commitment. So this is not one of those masterminds that you get together and like once every couple of months, once a quarter, for example, and just share ideas and whatnot and plan for your year. This is a kind of mastermind where you are meeting regularly. You're having conversations with people who are just as committed to being in that mastermind as you are. And what happens is if you're all equally committed to not just building that relationship, but actually having a long-term relationship with the people that you are in this mastermind with, the level of the conversations that you have there are so much deeper. And not only that, being in a mastermind that you are committed to for a long period of time, for example, at least, I would say at least a year, you want to commit to developing this relationship with other people in this mastermind, and you want them to commit to developing a relationship with you for at least a year, right? And if you do find a mastermind and you are engaging in these conversations regularly, you'll find that people start to really know you. That's the whole point, right? They know you, they understand your personality because they've been cultivating this relationship with you. And also they are reflecting back the things you don't see in yourself. All right, so those are 3 strategies that have helped me and also my clients overcome those moments of imposter syndrome, when we have that imposter syndrome, and I hope that they will help you as well. But is imposter syndrome always bad? Is it just 100% bad? Well, one of the coaches that I've hired to work with me constantly reminds me of the law of polarity. The law of polarity states that all things exist as dualities. So these are opposing forces or opposites that are interdependent and actually are necessary for the existence of the other. For example, we cannot have dark if we don't have light, right? We won't understand what darkness is if we don't also understand what lightness is. We can't have hot without cold. We can't have happiness without sadness. So these are the dualities. That's the law of polarity. We cannot have one without its opposite. So if we think about that as a law, then we can think about imposter syndrome as having, of course, these negative consequences that we talked about earlier today, but then it can't be all bad. If negative imposter syndrome exists, then there has to be a positive as well, according to the law of polarity. Everything exists in duality. So what would be a positive thing about having imposter syndrome? So I want to share a reframe for you that has really helped me to shift my own perspective whenever I encounter imposter syndrome in myself. And I hope that it will help you as well, and something that you can really just take away from this podcast episode today. So we'll get to that in just a moment. Now, earlier I mentioned that imposter syndrome can really impact the way we show up. And really it can impact specifically the way we use our voices, the way our voices sound. For example, if we are in a networking situation and we feel like we are imposters, we feel like we don't belong there, then that energy is going to show up in the way that we use our voices. It's going to show up in the way that we carry ourselves. And I call these vocal tells. So vocal tells are those subtle signs that give away what you're truly thinking or what you're truly feeling in certain circumstances. Previously, I taught a masterclass where I went through 3 practical strategies that anybody can learn to change the way that they speak so that they can show up as their best, most authentic selves, even if they are not feeling that way in the moment. In this masterclass, you will learn about vocal tells. You'll also learn about some of the habits that you may have that you don't realize you have that are actually impacting your authority, your influence, and the impact that you want to have. I'm making the replay of this masterclass available for free for a limited time. So to check it out, you can go to krystaldiaz.com/masterclass, and it's Krystal with a K. All right, so we talked about a lot today in this podcast episode. We talked about imposter syndrome. We talked about the 3 underlying beliefs that contribute or give rise to imposter syndrome. We talked about the consequences that could happen if we allow imposter syndrome to overrun our lives. And I also shared 3 strategies that can help overcome imposter syndrome. Now, finally, I want to answer one question here, which is imposter syndrome always bad? So earlier I talked about the law of polarity, which is everything exists in duality. So what might be one potential good thing when it comes to imposter syndrome? So here's something that has really helped me to change my own frame of thinking whenever I find myself going down this mindset of imposter syndrome. Instead of seeing it as a setback, recognize it as a sign. Recognize it as a clear signal that actually you're feeling imposter syndrome because you are actually on the verge of stepping outside your comfort zone. So we really think about that for a second. We wouldn't feel imposter syndrome if we are happily just stuck in our own small world, right? We just isolate ourselves from everybody and we just do what we know we can do and don't achieve anything beyond that. Then, it's less likely that we'll be feeling imposter syndrome because we're just living in our little bubble. But if you are experiencing imposter syndrome, then that's a sign that actually you're on the verge of potentially stepping outside of your comfort zone. And that's a good thing. This is a sign that I am being called towards a bigger, more expanded version of myself. I think about it as the universe or my higher self, whatever you want to call it, inviting you to make a choice. Inviting you to make a choice between staying where you are or taking a step into something unknown. So imposter syndrome can actually be a testament to your ambition and the potential that you have not yet fully realized. And so when you start to hear that inner critic say, who do you think you are to think you can achieve these things? Who do you think you are to think that your gifts or your skills can be valuable to other people, or that you can be as successful as you want to be? That's your invitation to step up and say, I think that, right? To make that choice. Who do you think you are? I've decided that is who I am. it can be a sign that you are actually ready to step into a bigger version of yourself, and you are coming to this precipice, or you're coming to a crossroad where you are being invited to make a choice. Are you going to stay as you are, or are you going to step into this bigger version of yourself, or this more expanded version of yourself, and take on new potential realities that are in fact available to you? I hope you enjoyed this episode and got value from it. And if you did, please consider subscribing to the podcast channel if you are listening, or subscribing on YouTube if you are watching this as a video on YouTube. And of course, consider joining my free masterclass. You can get instant access to the replay of this masterclass by going to krystaldiaz.com/masterclass. That's Krystal with a K. In this masterclass, I teach 3 exercises that anybody can learn to change the way that they speak so that they can increase their influence, authority, and confidence. So if you feel called to using your voice in a bigger way and you want to learn how to do that, be sure to check out this masterclass. That's it for now. Until next time.